Hi guys, before I start this week's episode of the Vincast, I just want to put a call out there that if you'd like to get involved in supporting the podcast in some way, I'd really love to hear from you. And that could be in the form of sponsorship. I'm happy to talk about your particular product on the show. Or it could be even designing a logo for the podcast, which would be fantastic. Or also writing and recording some music that could be used as the intro and outro for the show. So I would just love to hear from you, even if you have some suggestions about topics or guests you'd like to listen to. So email me at thevincast@gmail.com. I'm open to any kind of feedback that you might have. I'd also like to let you know that I'm planning something a little bit different for episode 50 of the podcast, and that is to have listeners to the podcast dial in via Skype and record chats that we can have. Now, you can ask me a question about wine, about myself. We can talk about one experience that you've had. So let me know. Again, thevincast@gmail.com. Email me if that's something you'd be interested in, and I can set a date and a time for people to dial in. But as always, I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hello there, Vincasters, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Kersbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and as always, this podcast is about wine, wine culture, and wine people. It's great to have lots of new listeners on board. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you've been going back and listening to previous episodes. There have been some absolute doozies, and I enjoy recording them, hopefully as much as you enjoy listening to them. Just want to do a quick shout out to Ben Yoffa, who actually gave me some really lovely feedback on Instagram. Obviously, guys, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Intrepid Wino. You can find Intrepid Wino on Facebook. But you'll be able to find links to all that sort of stuff on intrepidwino.com, which is where you can find all of the previous episodes of the podcast and my writings. And you'll find links also to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, that kind of thing. If you weren't already aware, the Intrepid Wino is actually a name that I gave myself when I started my blog in 2011, which was for the purpose of chronicling a trip that I was taking for 16 months around the world, visiting wine regions. And so I was writing about all the wineries I was visiting. I was writing about my impressions of different wine regions. And when I got back to Australia, I got introduced to a guy by the name of Josh Elias, who was starting a brand new wine publication based here in Melbourne. And I had the opportunity to actually put together an article that incorporated some of the stuff that I learnt on my trip. So this week's episode is actually with Josh, and they are now 4 editions in. It's really fantastic. It's being distributed in lots of different parts around the world. And he talked about his experiences, his passions about wine that led him to starting his own publication. And he also talked about some of the things he's got planned for upcoming editions of Alquimie. So I hope you enjoy it. If you did, please let us know on any of the various forms of social media. And I'll see you on the other side. Josh, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Finally, I have to say, I've been trying to get you on for a while now, but obviously you've been very busy with Alquimie, so it's great to finally get you on.
It's great to be here. It's lovely.
Now, I usually start the podcast episodes with asking people what their first interaction with wine was that kind of made them kind of sit up and take notice and set them on the path of following passion or a career in wine. So what was it for you?
I think it started with food probably before it was with wine. When I was studying law, I worked for 6 months in a restaurant in Melbourne, an Italian restaurant, as just a general chef's buddy. All dogs kind of parts on board, looking around for something to do, and they happened to allow me to be a kitchen hand come, larder chef, and I was worked out very quickly that chefing was not for me. It's kind of law school and chefing are probably one of the most two polar opposite work environments that you can do at the same time. So I worked long shifts and still had a massive passion for the industry of hospitality. Then decided to go to the front of house, upskilled quickly from waiting into sommelier because I just thought that wine was a really interesting drink that I'd tried in my travels, but I never thought it was possible to work in it. When working for my family business with my mum, who imports fabric from Italy, since 16, I would travel to Italy to meet suppliers with my mum because I'd worked there on the holidays importing fabrics. So tasting food, drinking wine, and getting to know it, well before 18, but at the same time, nevertheless, with this interest into the place that it came from. It was always about, a supplier's house. It was about context with a meal. And when I worked front of house, I thought, okay, hold on, I can actually upskill into this. I can work in this industry. And then the bug caught me really hard. I didn't expect it because it wasn't the sort of thing where I set out at the start and thought, this is something that I can pursue and get involved with really heavily from study and immersion. But I really got the L'Année de Vin kit, the sniffing kit to smell all the different flavors in wines, and worked really intensely in restaurants. I worked from that little Italian restaurant, went to Bistro View and Vue de Monde, and then through to Attica for 2 years, a restaurant in Melbourne, and a couple of different places since then. But essentially, I was really immersed, and I never took up my law degree and pursued that avenue because it didn't hit me the same way that wine did. Wine had a resonance, both theoretical and practical, physically tasting, that I didn't get with the theoretical bounty that law had. It was only theoretical. There was nothing physical about it. And I think,
But you started the law studies?
I finished my law studies.
Okay.
Yeah, so I continued working on the floor at night whilst I was working whilst I was doing my law degree at Monash Uni.
Did you find that there was some kind of crossover between wine appreciation and the law in terms of kind of breaking down the elements and investigating and sort of seeing
Absolutely.
how they coalesced and,
Yeah,
and,
I think,
and the kind of the background behind things, almost sort of reverse engineering?
For sure. I mean, like, the thing about law school was that you never actually get taught the law, you get taught how to research.
Right.
And for wine, that's so important because you taste something, you want to know why, you ask yourself those questions, and then you investigate. And
Sure.
you use those deductive techniques, you compare it to other wines that are similar, you learn about the producer, all the little variables. I mean, the variables is what makes the beauty of wine, and there are numerous that you can uncoil for any given situation. So
Yeah.
there was definitely something in common between what I was learning in law school. And no doubt, when I was working on the floor at Bistro View, the RACV club is next door, so a lot of old barristers would go up and have their drinks post-dinner. And the amount of business cards I got given by barristers who would ask me, what are you still doing working on the floor if you're doing a law degree? And I was like, come on, mate, like, we're both going to end up drinking at the end of the day. I mean, most of them were sort of having well into their second bottle of red on the way to whiskey, and I just figured I'd shortcut the whole process and avoid 50 years of practice and get there. So it was...
And whilst working in hospitality, particularly in front of house, I'm sure you would have been working with other people who would have influenced you in some way in terms of your education. What were kind of some of the early lessons or really important things that you learned about wine that kind of got you even deeper in that rabbit hole?
Yeah, pushed you down the rabbit hole. To be honest, I'm still firmly down it. I don't think, hopefully I never come up, because I think that the more you search below ground, the more, the further you get involved. And in terms of people that have influenced me, I think Ainsley, the manager at Attica at the time, she had this beautiful skill with people. Mm-hmm. She was really personable. She had a heart of gold. She would work herself to the bone in order to make sure that everyone else was nourished. And it was this amazing environment that was so much an epitome of hospitality. It felt like a home to a lot of people that came to dine there, even though it was white linen tablecloths, people in suits. And to me, that was a personability which really got me involved with wine, because we didn't have a sommelier on the floor at that time at Attica. Everyone was serving wine, and as a result, we all sat in on wine tastings. I can still remember a Madeira tasting where I sort of had no interest in Madeira at the time. I was sort of might have learnt about it here or there, or tasted by the glass. And she just got everyone to pick it up and sniff it and stick your nose in the glass and basically snorkel in the wine in order to remember what it is that we should think about in the future about this wine. Mm. So she's a great influence. And I mean, my studies have been through Master Sommelier and the Master of Wine courses as more formal kind of characters. And Evan Goldstein was an American chap who's a Master Sommelier, and he's so charismatic. He just like blew my socks off when we had the certified in Australia. We did a little course, and he just had great anecdotes. Like, you know, when you go to Burgundy, you should get to know Beaujolais because that's all you'll be able to afford, you know, when you get there. And I just love those sort of things where it's so human and so real. But, you know, you understand that there's a commercial imperative to the wine industry as well. And it's got all the elements like the wine industry, and those are the characters that they bring it to life to you. Both of those people are quite animated. I respond to personable, animated people who can invite you into a concept. But yeah, in terms of those sort of inspirations, you look for them yearly, you look for them more and more often, because with this industry, you work hard hours, you know, especially in hospitality. Now that we're publishing, it's a bit different type of hours, very private as opposed to very public when you're doing hospitality. But you search, you know, in our generation, you want constant appeasement, you want constant things to bite into and to chew on.
Gratification.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, obviously, your mum, you went with your mum over to Italy, and you were, I'm assuming, sort of wined and dined and stuff like that. Were your parents into wine very
Not
much?
really. Like, they'd have Pinot, they'd go to Mornington, they'd be interested in the Yarra, sort of day trips more
Cellar
than...
door visiting, that
Yeah,
kind of
exactly. Nothing that was sort of a cellar at home or anything. Like, my grandfather, when he found out that I was into wine, like, basically unearthed under the stairs, and there was, you know, a couple of old bottles from the 70s. But my family is not really into wine as much as I am. They've got and I think that's why I got in touch with a lot of the personable, generous people, because they welcomed me in the same way that my family would, but at the same time, wine was a subject that I investigated personally. It's not a family background at all.
But at the same time, I would think that in working with textiles, you're working with artisans, you know, who are
product of origin.
sourcing raw material and you know, extracting, you know, the
natural
core
product,
thing,
yeah.
and you know, in a
Crafting.
crafting
Yeah.
it into a finished product.
These
So-
are artisans that, I mean, suit makers are few and far between these days in terms of genuine, you know, the old school kind of artisan 80-year-old Italian man or
Yeah.
British tailor.
Yeah. Who
Savile
clearly just take pride in their work. And
Oh, absolutely. And it's the same regionality. I mean, Biella in the north of Italy is great for suiting. Prato in just near Florence is great for coating. There are certain areas that are better for certain production styles of different coatings and suitings and shirtings. And you go to India for certain cottons and silks. I mean, there's definitely a product of origin and a connection with when you visit that place. I mean, you go to Prato, you're having bistecca. You go to Biella, you're having something cotoletta milanese, like a little veal chop or something like that. And you know that is, you know where you are. There's no mistaking where in the world you are at that time when you're buying coating or buying shirting or buying suiting, whatever it is.
And working in hospitality, obviously, you clearly had the good fortune of working at some pretty fabulous venues. You had lots of exposure to different kinds of cuisine. Did you have any kind of particular affinity with cuisines from anywhere?
I ate pretty broadly. I mean, I think that with Bistro View, that was that classic bistro style, and I worked at Grossi Florentino for a while recently. That's Italian. Those are sort of more daily sort of things that we enjoy eating at home, but otherwise, I mean, Attica, you don't exactly, that's very modern Australian, you know, not in the sense of a prawn and pineapple skewer of the 90s and early 2000s, but this is, you know, sort of Ben's idea of what his interpretation, which is very unique, and he's a game changer. He's an amazing chef, an amazing person, and he drives that restaurant. I mean, every time you go there, it's an organic Petri dish. There's another section, there's another herb section, there's another garden, there's a soft serve machine out the back, there's you know, a distillation roto evaporator. There's something in every corner that you can visit, and that's something that he develops by himself, and it's surpassed so much of what we did when I was there now, being 3-4 years ago. So
I could imagine it would have been pretty difficult to kind of craft a beverage program that would be cohesive with something so unique.
Oh yeah, it's very difficult because the dishes are inherently matched to themselves.
Right.
They have their acids, they have their sugars, they have their proteins, and there's a balance between those 5 senses that people talk about with hot, sweet, salty, savory kind of things. So you really have to look to either contrast in some way, but a lot of Ben's food's real delicate for the first 5-6 courses. It's not till desserts that you get a bit heavier or the last protein dish. So you really are looking to fade into the background, because I think that drinks can easily overpower food.
So you had some early experiences in traveling to Italy with your mum. When you sort of started to work in hospitality and get more interested in wine, did you have the opportunity to travel in that sense and sort of see some wine regions, get amongst that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think as best as anyone can. I mean, I managed to, when I was doing WSET, I managed to do one of my diploma exams overseas in London and pitched a trip onto that. Anytime that I've gone overseas, I've always tried to make it around wineries. So, I mean, I'll go in July and I'll try and visit the south of Rhone and Provence and try and always tie it in. Whenever I'm overseas, I'm always thinking about what beverages are produced. And it's not always wine. It can be pastis, it can be limoncello, it can be anything. But it's about finding places, because once you enter that cellar door, once you enter that person's home, they know that you've come from Australia, which is a way away. They know you're keen to be there.
Yeah.
It's amazing the generosity that you can achieve, and it's so much better than going to a restaurant at 7:30 and then knocking out at 9 and being double bloated from 5 courses. It's much more slow and organic, and you get the feeling for what their actually lifestyle is, what it's like.
So when did you actually start the more of the wine study side of things?
It was real soon. I mean, when I was working at Bistro View, I mean, as soon as I realized that I didn't want to be a cook, I was pretty much simultaneously a waiter and studying wine. When I did my first WSET course, the Wine, Spirit and Education Trust, I was actually at Bistro View at the time. Mm-hmm. I think I lied at the WSET course and said that I was just working in a fabric warehouse as a fabric cutter. And I'd already been reading books, reading Jancis, smelling and sniffing vials of Linné de Van like a geek, and trying to find.
I think that's kind of nerdy, actually.
Yeah. Distinctions, and just trying to find my little way into the wine world, and writing notes, folders on France and New Zealand, and all these different wines that I was interested in trying.
Did you start keeping notes for yourself as far as wines you were tasting and your impressions?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things I tried doing was writing tasting notes. Subsequently, I've never looked at them. I always find that I'll never look at a tasting note as much as my intentions would be good. I've never re-looked at them, but
part of the reason I don't look back at my tasting notes is because my handwriting is so atrocious that I can't even understand what it says.
Pretty much, yeah. That's a pretty good point. Yeah. That is pretty good.
When did you kind of start to think beyond hospitality?
I think I'm not a night person. I've never been a night person, and I don't think that I'm a morning person, but at the same time, I'm a family sort of orientated person. I had a really strong family growing up, so I never really took well to, Christmas Day, all types of family occasions, anyone's birthday, not being there, which is such a sacrifice of hospitality, and I never naturally gravitated to it. I hated it in my heart, knowing that I wasn't there for that family member or that friend. So that was something that I always had an eye on trying to re-achieve in some capacity, and then realizing, the current job that I have is a complete fluke. It wasn't my idea. So at the same time, that's luck. That would be ridiculous to suggest that I planned it. But I was always had one eye on an opportunity outside that could still indulge an interest in wine, but outside of hospitality. And I needed hospitality, to be honest, at that time in my life, to taste as many wines as I did, to be exposed to the food that I was, and to engage with the public in that way, to see what they wanted, to see what it is that the people want when they drink.
Understanding context.
Yeah, exactly.
The application of wine is, I think, lost in a lot of wine communication, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's looking, but at the same time, if you look at restaurant reviews, they barely mention anything to do with the beverage program.
Yeah, well, I love AA Gill for restaurant reviews, because sometimes you don't even know if he's reviewing a restaurant. Like, he'll be on the plane somewhere, or the way that he describes it is so amazingly mindful. It's like he's writing it, and you can imagine as he's writing it what he's thinking about, and it's a conversation.
Yeah,
it's not dictatorial. It's not, you should go here because they have the hottest falafels in town.
Sure.
It's you should go. You should go and wander, and then wherever it takes you, if it happens to be here, it might be good or bad.
One of the first, but the way I was introduced to you was through our mutual friend Dave Fletcher, who I still need to chase up and get on at some point. I think it's going to have to be via Skype because he's over in Barolo. And then because he mentioned what you were putting together, but he also said, "Oh, look, my mate Josh, he does he does his videos, tasting videos, the tasting group. How did you kind of think about that and start doing that?
Doing that along. Well, I think that at the time I really wanted an expression, and this was before Alquimie, the current magazine that I'm doing, and I wanted to be able to find a way to communicate about wine that was different to other people. And I'd seen Gary Vaynerchuk do what he did.
Yeah, because that was, as soon as I saw your video, I was like, oh, cool, it's like Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd seen those videos and I thought, this guy is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, he's just so charismatic.
Yeah.
And that probably gives you a good insight into what I thought of Evan Goldstein, because Gary Vaynerchuk is similar in terms of his presentation style, probably not as pop culture. Evan Goldstein's a little bit older, different generation, but
still,
same idea.
Still their own kind of language,
unique
way
character
of way of approaching things and reference points at the end of the day.
And I think that what you were saying before about wine communication is so true. And I think so much of it is language. The problem is the limitations of language.
Sure.
I think that mannerism, personality, context, dining table, environment, everything like that is so much to a wine's story that a tasting note of 45 words and a score is not going to communicate.
Yeah.
And I think that language is one of the biggest shortcomings we have. And so I looked at video as being visual and another element and something added to a wine communication ability. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that I really enjoyed and did about 100 or whatever it was episodes of that. And just sort of decided that when Alquimie came along, I was going to have to choose time-wise between one or the other.
Sure.
And chose Alquimie because that was really a different... I had moved beyond what Tasting Group could offer me, and at that stage of my life, I thought, and what is now this stage of my life, this is a new opportunity that's going to provide a different visual element because we had partners in the business who could offer something that I couldn't.
Was it pretty involved putting together an individual video for the Tasting Group?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think that it was pretty easy in the sense that, once someone rocked up, we would be 10, 15 minutes of prep, and then the editing afterwards was just, and this is where Alquimie is so much better because we have a photographer, we have a designer. These are the people that specialize in those areas. I'm not a video editor, so I didn't, that took me a while, probably, an hour, 2 hours of video, which anyone who professional probably would have knocked it out in 5 minutes.
It was James. James told me about it.
James Fryer. Yeah. And I think James is abroad at the moment. I think he's
he's living over in London.
Yeah.
Well, he was actually on a relatively early episode of the podcast talking about his experiences with wine baptism of fire.
Yeah.
And so I remember we were talking with him about actually when I was starting this podcast, he gave him some really helpful tips, and I think he used the Tasting Group as a reference point.
Yeah, I think that had enormous value to me personally, and that's pretty selfish to say. But I think also I got great positive feedback from people, and I think that being 15, 20, 25 years younger than most people when I traditionally taste, when I was doing WSET, Master Sommelier, those sort of things, learning, I wanted to express myself differently as well. I wanted to have a different communication vehicle, and Tasting Group did that, and I think that it resonated with quite a few people. But it was definitely a chapter that I enjoyed. It was good fun.
So when did you first get the kind of the kernel that eventually grew into Alquimie? What were your reference points to sort of have an idea about what Alquimie was specifically going to be? Yeah,
well, I think that in terms of the actual aesthetic, that's driven very much by James and Nick. So Nick's the designer and James the photographer, and both of them are sort of really good in their field. Nick had a graphic design magazine, and he approached me. So in terms of an aesthetic, I saw Nick's graphic design and thought, okay, well, he's got a very transparent philosophy. He tries to show everything for what it is, and sometimes that's what's and all, but it's not sharpened, it's not hyper real, it's just honest. And that resonated with my voice as a communicator because I'm not outlandish, I'm not controversial to the max. I'm somebody who looks for an honest opinion and a day in the life, a mindful opinion that expresses where we are now. And this is something that should resonate because that shared table should apply to anybody's shared table. And for that reason, we had a humility to our voice, which was in common. And James, the photographer, mirrored that with what we saw of his food photography and his landscape photography. He's visited China and across the world taking photos of interesting people and interesting places. And we found that we could explore the environment of wine, the environment of beer, the environment of all drinks, not cups of liquid, but actual places where people live, habitat, that sort of thing. And we could explore that with an honest voice. And so that's what we tried to do with Alquimie. And that was, I guess, a sort of an insight into how we put together the bare bones of the project.
I have to ask, for the audience who probably haven't heard of alchemy before, firstly, what does alchemy mean?
The actual word itself?
Yeah.
Well, so that's a Latin derivation. It's spelt in a painful way, which we have to explain to everybody we tell, which is Alquimie.
Which is why I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a Latin derivation of alchemy, which is ALC, ALKEMY, or however you spell it.
ALCH, yeah.
Yeah, ALCH, which is the English spelling. And basically, the idea is that it's chemistry. It's working with alloys and melting all types of bonding liquids, silver and gold, to copper and plating and things like that. So it's the idea of chemistry and creation. And so we looked at that idea of narrative and creation because the story is part of alchemy, and we always try to, it's a section within alchemy, and we always wanted to communicate a narrative, a story of what's going on, a creation. And these are all things that make us ask why questions. I mean, creation itself is the biggest why question man ever talks about in any sort of religion. But in terms of alchemy, creation of wine, creation of beer, creation of spirits is the idea that we ask when we approach something. Why did you do it? How is it done? And, on a daily basis, how does it relate to who you are? And I think that creation and alchemy was a name that stuck with us for that reason.
I would have thought probably two of the earliest alchemists that people would be introduced to. Firstly, you've got Jesus, who converted water into wine.
Yeah, also a carpenter, so it's pretty handy to have around.
Yeah, that too. But I think the other one would be Rumpelstiltskin, who had to spin, was it straw into gold?
Yeah. That's hilarious.
But what I like about the name alchemy and its application to the material is the conversion of something into something else. Yeah. So in the way that you convert raw materials like grapes, or other products into a beverage, or raw vegetable or meat into a beautiful cooked meal. You guys are sort of crafting unique people and unique stories into your own kind of both visual and written language. Crafting that story and finding the sort of the nugget of truth to it.
Yeah, and I think that we try to create a craft and a workmanship to our publication, but also more than that, I think that using an old derivation of the term, we do try to look for timeless and tested matter. So we have a lot of current people who are doing trendy things and so on, but ultimately we try and incorporate them into a larger narrative of how that drink has been around for generations and how it's been crafted for generations in a similar way, and that there is a craft and a craftsmanship as a result of that person's livelihood.
As far as the physical magazine itself, one of the other things that I like about that, the fact that it feels more artisan, is it's not glossy. It feels sort of made by humans kind of thing, rather than just sort of on a printing press.
I think that that's what current publishing should be. I mean, you look at obviously there's Frankie and Smith Journal in a lifestyle perspective in Melbourne, or Queensland is where Morrison Media is, but then you've got Noble Rot, who are doing a similar thing in terms of wine, probably a bit grungier than us, but at the same time they're doing uncoated stock, real matte finishes and beautiful. And Nick will probably kick my ass for talking about graphic design because I'm the editor. But a lot of the physical feels of a lot of the magazine's port. I just got introduced to one from Mexico called Hoja Santa, which is amazing. And the current world of publishing, Kennedy, there's so many magazines that are going around at the moment which are independent and they feel crafted. They feel like a document that can last on your table. I mean, if you pour a glass of water over most of those thin stocks, glossy magazines, the whole thing will stick together and chuck it out like it's useless.
But I think that's really important as well, with so much communication and journalism going online. I think really people are connecting more with that textile, the actual the feel of a publication.
People want to be able to smell it,
because I don't think books have really suffered too much. It's mostly just newspapers and magazines have suffered in subscription and readership, and so I think the more that publications, whether they're wine, food, anything, the more they have, the more they feel like a book, like they feel like they're handmade. I think that people are going to connect with them.
Yeah, I think that when people buy any of these magazines that I've spoken about, I mean, Kennedy's really in depth, and I mean, there's heaps of amazing writing out there, but when they buy them, they don't think about the ethos of the publisher when they buy it. They look at the aesthetic of the cover, they feel the magazine, they open and flip through a couple of pages, they see a couple of spreads, and they think, oh, this is something I could be interested in. So there is an onus on us to make it physically appealing as well as having a depth of content there, for sure.
It's one of the things, obviously I had in a previous episode Jacopo Cossater, who you met when he was here at the beginning of January. When they did their Kickstarter video to sort of promote it and to say what Settembre was going to be, one of the things they talked about was the fact that it was, the paper was going to come from the area,
which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, like they clearly understood that the physical embodiment of the publication, not what's actually printed on the paper
should
itself,
be reflective of the place.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's so much about regionality. I mean, we have an inherent Melbourne bias about how we talk about things. I have a New World palate. We do label a couple of our articles by New World and Old World palate because I prefer fruit in my wines. I prefer to drink them younger and things like that. Yeah. And you have to, we try and keep it objective, but ultimately we are still people with opinions. I think that regionality and understanding us as an Australian, I brought a glass of wine here today, which was Santolin's wine, the Chardonnay that he makes out of the Yarra Valley. I've never been more excited about Australian wine, and that's going to come through in the pages. I can't help it. There's going to be more Australian content. In the next edition, we have more Australian articles, but I think that the Noble Rot, in terms of what they do, they've got Lily Allen in the past. They've got a lot of British personalities. They're unashamedly pro-British culture, and you need to embrace your regionality. And their wine bench is
very French, which I think has a lot to do with
British
accessibility.
Well,
and the fact that French, but at the same time, there's a little bit more of a bent towards the kind of the punk side of French winemaking as well. Yeah, more in that kind of naturally. They did a whole edition profiling Jura, and Jura is so niche still.
I think of it as like the Seattle early 90s music scene of wine.
Grunge scene, of course. Yeah. Hopefully no one... Anyway. But in terms of the way that Alquimie is broken up into different sections, how did you kind of come up with that idea? Because there's 4 different components to it.
It was just about having something for every different type of reader. So the study is hardcore wine nerds sitting down to stick their teeth into something.
These are sort of deep, sort of long form articles.
Oh yeah, at least 2,000 words, most of them.
Lots of research.
I mean, as far as average word count of our publication, it exceeds greatly what other publications have.
Sure.
For a start, we expect that people, when they sit down, are probably going to be wandering in their brain with too much caffeine in their blood, wanting to sort of explore something a little bit different and take their mind on a journey to somewhere else. So all of our articles really have a longer form, longer engagement than you would use with the web. And there's a conscious decision to do that. But the story is a lot more narrative. Put yourself into someone's shoes and follow their journey. The palette is the tasting section.
So the story is a little bit more connecting with the person who's actually with
Correct.
The author.
You look at somebody who's basically following a path through their discovery of a beverage, whether they're a coffee roaster, whether they're a brewer, whether they're a distiller, whether they're a winemaker, and you see, you trace their steps backwards, back to uni, whatever they did in order to be who they are now.
It is one of the things that I think is lacking too much is I read a lot of articles in sort of very established mainstream wine publications, and I kind of look at them and go, this almost could have been written by a marketing manager or a PR communications manager.
I think
it's almost like all this information you've included in here, it's lovely, but it's information I could have just easily gleaned from the website.
Without being too critical, a lot of them probably are influenced by marketing managers. But at the same time, those are bigger publishers with a lot more employers than we have, so they have a different company structure to what we do. Sure. And I think that the boys at Noble Rot, a lot of other people in independent publishing, Jacopo Cossato with Settembre, he would empathise with what we're doing in terms of our approach. But There's an idea here that in the different articles, the palette will bring together what is in the glass, because people want guidance. We don't want to be an authoritarian prospect. That's why we don't score wines, but people want to see what you would like to drink. So the palette's always an indication of what's in the glass, and the excess is tangential kind of musing, where you can take, as I said, an extra sip of caffeine and let your mind wander and think about what it is that, what superpower would you like? So the excess takes you to somewhere else. It'll take you to somewhere like Mexico for tequila, which is what we're doing with mezcal and those sort of things for next edition. But there's all types of different stuff that we can throw in there, that an interview with David Bromley, the artist, or something like that, which is a bit different to a traditional wine publication.
Now, each edition is pretty diverse. It covers a lot of different areas of beverage, and often there's articles about cuisine, or just interviewing someone who might not actually be involved in the wine or beverage industry or hospitality at all. But it has some connection to it. What's the process of actually constructing an edition? Like, how do you you're contacting people who are going to actually write articles, and then how do you put them all together?
Well, we sort of aim for about 18 to 20 articles on any given edition, and we probably try and solicit 25, 26 so that we can let things drop out to give authors more time. I hate rushing authors, so in a quarterly publication we have the luxury where we can wait for something.
Did you say you hate Russian authors?
My fiance is half Russian, so we'll leave that.
We'll leave that.
No. We'll leave that at what it was. But with I really like to try and spread it diversely, because a lot of my friends who have worked in the trade, they don't want to read a trade publication on their days off.
Right.
They don't want to know how much Jim Beam is by the case. That sort of thing is not interesting to them.
Sure.
What they want to know is something on the periphery of what they do, but somebody who shares an interest. It's like that conversation that you start with at a party, and you're like, let's not talk about wine. I mean, it's dinner time. We've finished work, and then surely enough, 40 minutes later, you're talking about wine, because everything is just the stars have aligned, and you've come full circle, and you're talking about wine again. And that's one of those things that we really try and... I mean, David Bromley was a great example. As an artist, I had no intention of asking him anything about wine, and then all of a sudden he brings up that his family was from a McLaren Vale, and so on and so forth. So I think that ultimately, what somebody's character is like. You have a rough idea when you interview them. What if an author has an idea that they want timeless information, that they want something that will last on a coffee table for ages, we choose our authors carefully, and we let them take a bit of license, and we choose our subjects carefully when we interview them. And with those two sort of things, you have a lot of flexibility to let it go where it goes. I mean, I guess it's a bit like the show that you have here. You can kind of let the person dictate where you're going to go with something.
Sure.
And you have to have a certain degree of trust. Otherwise, you will strangle the life out of what you're doing. For sure.
In terms of the more recent editions, I kind of noticed that they've gotten a little bit bigger, which is great. More value. What are you working on as far as edition 4? 5, sorry.
Yeah, edition 5. I said we've got an article on tequila and mezcal, but also, we've got some pretty fun stuff in terms of tasting. I think our premium tasting, which we're going to conduct next week, is Northern Rhone. So that's four pretty amazing producers of different appellations of benchmark Rhone gear, which is pretty wine nerdy. That's sort of the premium tastings always for sort of wine bling, but then at the opposite end. We've got 2 fun individuals which we're going to be interviewing next week. Will be Joost Bakker, who does Joost Bakker, who does a lot of sustainable environments and things like that, and works a lot with planting and earth and green products.
Joost used to come out to Shandon when we'd have big events and design these sort of glass chandelier sort of things from wine glasses.
That's amazing. Yeah,
they were incredible.
He's pretty cool, and like his broth bar in the city, it's called Brothel, which is just like reused all types of stock ingredients like chicken carcasses and beef bones and things like that, is unbelievable. Like
that's the one where he's sourcing stuff from other
restaurants.
Yeah,
they're using the leftovers, and it's so tasty. I mean, you could smash a bowl when you go there.
Nourishing.
It's just stuff. You just feel all types of good. I'd imagine it's when people buy tofu, it's what they feel like.
Comfort food.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's got this whole holistic idea to it. And then we've also got Jeff Kennett. So that's going to be on the polar opposite. Yeah, it's going to be lots of fun. I think we're going to have a coffee next week, so we'll see how that goes in terms of where the conversation takes us, because it could go any given direction, and hopefully quickly, because he's known for not holding back on an opinion. So I think
this is true.
There's going to be a lot of wealth to the next edition, but. To be honest, like when we craft a magazine, when we craft anything, like the first thing that hits me is, am I interested, and does this take me to somewhere where I haven't been before, and or if I've been there, can I still explore different angles of it? And the people who contribute, I love chatting with our authors. I love chatting. I mean, when you draft an article for the first edition, which we published, and when we edited it like 7 or 8 times.
We did.
I mean, and the process of us communicating about it, doing tastings, that's part of the richness. I mean, if you don't enjoy the journey, don't make the product.
That was very much, I didn't feel rushed at all in that, it did take a little while to sort of come back, and then we looked at the wines and stuff like that. Actually, I'm really looking forward, because someone I mentioned in that article, who I work vintage with, is Johannes from Gunderloch, and he's going to be here in the coming weeks.
Next week.
So I'm so excited to be able to catch up with him. Hopefully I can chat with him as well. But no, I certainly really enjoyed that process.
And that was a fun article about father and son and taking over a sort of a legacy in winemaking.
Yeah,
and that's sort of, nothing says more timeless than that. Like, it's such an amazing story that happens so much of in France, the old world, in Australia as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, previous guests I've had, like just from Australia. Second, even third generation, so continuing that legacy is sort of, I'm sure there's a feeling of pressure to a certain extent.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that in Australia, overseas, no matter where the story comes from, we're just looking for interest and character and personality and vitality, because one of the fearful things is, where do you get content from? What are you going to have in your next edition? And all those sort of questions. But at the same time, we think to ourselves, like, how lucky we are to have so much color and so many variables. Sure. I mean, every element of production, every element of the environment, has a story. And we couldn't believe that when we started doing the magazine, there weren't more people doing what we're actually doing. So, it's just a lucky sort of thing. I
kind of felt the same way about the podcast, to be honest. Now, I think even from edition 1, you were able to secure some really interesting distribution and get the magazine out there. So the Alquimie is available, not just obviously in Australia, but all over the world. I think James even said on Twitter recently, London, hey, where can I get it in London?
Yeah, well, that's definitely been a goal, because in terms of distribution, Europe, Australia, for better or worse, we are leaders in a lot of things, but in some things we do follow, and we did have a point of distributing to London and to America, because a lot of key influence makers are in those regions, and we wanted people to see that our publication, I mean, we were written up in Monocle magazine before we were in Australian things like Broadsheet. So to me, that says that there's a willingness overseas to engage something and to be the first to like it, whereas in Australia we do sometimes. I'm not being super generalizing here, but sometimes we do come second to the party. So we felt like being overseas was really important to us, and not to mention the fact that there's only 20 million people in Australia, so let's expand our horizon to other drinkers and try and make it accessible. We always wanted to be worldly. We always made the magazine, roughly 40% by content of overseas content, in terms of the drinks that we drink. And I think that, to be honest, the other thing which is massive for an Australian market is that we like European products. I mean, we love Italian wine, we love Italian food, we love French wine. So it would be ridiculous for us not to indulge that content. And as it happens, only now am I taking a step back to say, okay, hold on, let's reel it in here and make it a little more Australian-centric, because we have an Australian accent.
Australian voice. And in terms of getting the magazine out there, obviously a lot of different people have actually seen it. Have you been contacted by many people kind of saying, hey, this magazine's great. Can I submit an article?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like edition 5, funnily enough, has been one of the crazy ones where I think in the last week we've probably got like 15 or 20 submissions in the last 4 days over the public holiday period.
Clearly, in terms of the people actually, the voices, they're thirsty for somewhere to actually be able to express.
Absolutely. And I think that we want to give everyone an opportunity in terms of having their true voice heard.
Sure.
I've become better at that as an editor because I'm not a journalist. I'm barely a wine writer. The cook versus the chef. Like I'm not studied in that area. So I've learnt to be better hands-off with articles. I've learnt better to say, this is yours, run with it, and we'll tweak it around the sides to fit our publication. But I mean, sometimes I've submitted articles for other people, as an Alquimie representative for another publication, and they've been halved. So I've sort of felt that burden and felt that, axe coming down on me, and decided to quickly run the other direction and let people have their opinion and let them have their voice. So I think that people are seeing an authentic voice come through when they submit their article. And so we actually plan to have a lot of
at the same time, voices, like there's numerous editions that people can get a real feel for it and sort of say, okay, here's how I can kind of just tweak things a little bit so that it cohesively fits in with the publication, with the kind of the idea behind what we're trying to say.
Well, I think that it comes down to communication, and there are so many great communicators in a very rich world of beverage.
Sure.
So, and increasingly, as you commented earlier, on the periphery of beverage and understanding that beverage is part of a broader experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's something that for us, I'm more engaged by because, as I said, with a strong family background and being the only person who has the wine interest, so many times around a dinner table, and you could look like a pretentious git if you didn't, act, hospitably or just be in person.
I think both of our partners must be so patient to just sort of
put up with it,
just smile. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
well, I
nice.
think that you obviously were on speaker, but the fact that I have a big nose and I'm Jewish often plays against me with my fiance in terms of knowing wine and nosing wine and all that kind of stuff. So it's all blurred into one, big kind of interesting alchemy pie. But it's an amazing experience to engage with anything with color, light, and beauty, and those are the things that we look for in terms of a new approach to the authors that contribute to the magazine.
Absolutely. Well, I'm obviously very, very looking forward to edition 5 to come out. I think there's going to be some people that I've met, who are going to have an article in there. Hawk Waka Waka, which is exciting.
Yeah, Elaine Brown, which would be awesome. I mean, we chatted probably in July last year, and we did a little Skype conversation when I was in the States, actually. But she's a lovely person, and I just think that there's so much richness to this subject of drinks, and there's so much that we can write and communicate about what we do, that independent journalism has a duty to honour these voices when journalism from a printed perspective is in a decline.
Sure.
We're very counterculture in the less, burning bridges and more like stepping on the burning bridges element of it, because this is a really difficult industry to be in at the moment. You wouldn't be doing it for coin, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But we really want to meet these people and learn their stories because, to be honest, that's the richness that we get out of it. It's hearing amazing, just like when you bring a new wine into the country, just like when you try an ingredient on the plate that you've never tried before, bite into sea urchin when you've never had it, it's going to treat you in a way that's unlike any other seafood. So it's fun being dumped into the deep end of a drink that you've never heard of, to get involved and to try and float to the surface with some sort of knowledge.
But in terms of engaging with new and interesting subject material, engaging with new voices, and in the physical form itself, and obviously it's very beautifully communicated visually. I think absolutely what it says on the front, breathing new life into drinks.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's what we try and do, and we never get carried away, in terms of ego, because all of us, in terms of what we do with the magazine, is trying to be humble.
Sure.
And that comes from a service background as well, before I was any sort of wine hack in terms of writing.
So I really appreciate you making some time and sitting down today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I mean, your form of communication is another thing that adds a layer of richness to what we're doing.
Well, I try. Now, in terms of people hopefully trying to source copies, even
direct online, however people want to do it. But you send us an email, we can let you know where the closest stockist is to you, depending on whether you're listening overseas or listening in Australia. But we try and distribute pretty broadly through specialty like Magnation, Books for Cooks in Australia, and then common news agencies in various suburbs across the country, and overseas specialty stockists predominantly.
Sure. But that website's alquimie.com.
Yeah, .au with the QU in alchemy, which is the bane of people's life.
Yeah.
In terms of
and are you guys are on social media?
Yeah, Twitter and Facebook, and we have a website, and we try and interact in a different way. We've got a few videos coming up, which will be quite fun, interviewing people and asking them the questions, that generally we're too afraid to ask. Toshi from Market Lane is a roaster. We were there yesterday, asking him what he says to customers when we give them a caramel latte, or when they ask for one at Market Lane. So stuff like that, which is going to be pretty fun. Do I put ice in my white wine and stuff like that for sommeliers? It's going to be fun. It's not sort of aimed at answering all life's questions, but we've got a couple of videos which it just shows that we're trying to interact a little bit differently via web.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's a different medium to print.
But so it's at Alquimie.
Yeah, at Alquimie.
Instagram as well.
At Alquimie. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, like I said, look forward to edition 5 and look forward to catching up over a glass of wine.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great.
And as always, thank you guys for listening to this week's episode. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at IntrepidWino, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast, and that will let you know when there's a new episode or an upcoming guest. You can follow me on Facebook, facebook.com/IntrepidWino. Lots of interesting things there. And always come to intrepidwino.com to find every episode of the podcast, as well as lots of writings about my travels and experiences with wine. You can find some links through the website to iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, any form of different way of downloading the podcast, so you can listen to the podcast on your iPhone or Android device. Please do like and favorite, retweet whenever you can, rate and review. That really does help me out. As always, please do get in touch with me, even if you just want to provide some small feedback. But until next time, bye.